So as Stephen mentioned, I'm actually a postdoc at Sheffield working with Stephen on this project, and if any of you were there for Paula Stefan's keynote, you'll have an enhanced understanding of my plight. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the third phase of this research project, which was a series of interviews with publishers and with some editors. Now, we spoke to 22 publishers, all of whom were in quite senior positions with a kind of strategic perspective on the publishers' operations and the mega journal operations. And they represent 16 different publishers, 10 of whom currently produce a mega journal title. The interviews are quite wide-ranging, although taking mega journals as the primary focus. So we explored some definitions of the term, some motivations for launching or not launching a mega journal. We explored their perspectives on what soundness-only peer review means and the kind of governance process related to it. We talked about business models, the role of the journal within broader publisher portfolios. And finally, we sort of asked people to look into crystal balls and talk what they saw as the future for mega journals, how they currently interact with and might in the future work within the scholarly communication landscape. So this was a big data set, over 30 hours of audio recordings. We followed a quite rigorous thematic analysis process, an iterative coding process, and in the end, we've obviously got a lot to come out of this. So we've actually produced 3 papers, which are ready for submission over the next couple of weeks. So there'll be lots for you to read if you're interested in this work. But today, we're going to limit it to looking in detail at some of the responses to questions around motivations for launching a mega journal. These kind of have some broader implications for kind of understanding the mega journal model. So on the screen there are the 7 motivating factors which emerged from our research. Now, there's clearly an argument that some of these could be combined, some of them are perhaps broader and could subsume others, but this is really what the data was telling us. These were the distinct motivating factors that publishers talked about. And I'll very quickly, it should be reasonably self-explanatory, but providing a home for everything, and that's a phrase that was used by several publishers, refers to providing a venue for the type of article that might otherwise be difficult to publish, replication studies, null results, and also the output of interdisciplinary, multidisciplinary research that might not fit easily in any narrower scoped journal. Affecting change was both on a grand scale, so challenging some of the norms of the scholarly rewards and academic recognition systems that are still linked to impact factor, but also on a slightly narrower level to do with experimentation, providing a venue for approaches like open peer review, post-publication peer review, article level metrics. Support for open science. This was typically discussed in terms of open access, but also things like open data and supporting funder requirements. System efficiency referred to this idea of there being a kind of submit and reject cycle that authors could end up being trapped in, sort of a wasteful process as they work down a kind of hierarchy of journals. Generating revenue. Some publishers were open about the fact that a mega journal was seen as a valuable revenue source. Retaining rejections is linked to that, but has the advantage of a sort of competitive advantage of journals, of articles rejected by more selective titles, not going to other publishers, but being retained in-house in the mega journal. And finally, addressing kind of market factors. So in one sense, this is about the kind of supply side demand that there is now with a huge and growing output of research, but also a way of engaging with developing markets, China and other geographic areas. So it's interesting to note what we tried to do was look at what are the 4 characteristics that Stephen mentioned earlier kind of help deliver these or are associated with these factors. And I won't go into too much detail, but it is notable that the peer review for soundness only is essentially linked to all of those. So there's some support there for the notion that it really is the mega journal peer review policy is perhaps the single defining characteristic. So as we looked at some of the discussions around these motivations, there was a whole series of benefits that publishers associated with these, and that we found it interesting to classify as either societal benefits, so these are benefits to either to the academic community or even to the general public community, and business benefits, which typically are economic, are revenue related, but also have some sort of strategic and operational aspects as well. So we've put the societal benefits in there. I won't go through all of them as we're slightly pressed for time. What's interesting is that these are kind of linked to notions of removing barriers. So barriers to publication, barriers to access, and they're kind of challenging what are perceived as ineffective or currently inefficient processes. And it's also notable that taking a broad view of open science, a lot of those societal benefits kind of fit within the broader open science movement. It's probably also important to say that there was not universal agreement around all of these perceived benefits. Some saw some of these, but not others. Some kind of rejected this premise entirely. So we're not putting this up here as fact, but rather as representing the kind of range of opinions that we encountered. And then in terms of the business benefits, as I said earlier, they're mostly linked to revenue generation that's associated with a less selective peer review process, with a gold open access model. But there's also elements of operational aspects, economies of scale, competitive advantage, and that engagement with emerging markets. So I'll finish just with sort of three interesting points we thought emerged from this kind of figure. At face value, this has kind of positive implications, we think, for the mega journal model, because what we see are that there are incentives for publishers to engage with this kind of model, whilst also bestowing societal benefits, and that's a kind of interesting combination that can sort of effectively support this kind of potentially positive innovation. We think also this sheds some light on why, as Stephen said, some of the discourse around mega journals can be polarized. Because depending what sort of lens or what side of this figure you're looking at, there's potential for viewing mega journals, if we look purely at business benefits, as potentially the cash cow, the revenue generator. So there's some of that polarized debate is kind of represented in which side of this graph of this figure you're looking at. And finally, what also emerged in the interviews was a sense that the operational reality of running a large mega journal had significant challenges. So it required investment, technical infrastructure, human capital, that the governance associated with operating a kind of novel peer review system using a distributed editorial hierarchy was challenging, and that in order to sort of operate successfully, there was a sense from several interviewees that publishers needed to be focused on those societal benefits, that the risk associated with the investment required to operate successfully sort of required that focus on the societal benefits. And I think that has some quite interesting implications for the sustainability of the model. Thank you.
Thank you very much.